Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Sparxie guide. Here we'll go through her teams, builds, playstyles, and premium options, so that you can be a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you need to jump around, and with that, let's get into things. Sparxie is a 5-star fire Elation unit, who, for now, acts as our first carry in the Elation path. I don't want to fully summarize Elation for the 4th time, so let's go for some super short bullet points. Aha appears on the action bar with Elation units present, and on its turn, Elation units send out their own unique Elation skill. Elation units are able to deal Elation damage, which is a new type of damage that doesn't scale off of attack or damage percent, but instead a new stat called Elation percent, which is just a buffer for Elation damage. There's also a resource called Punchline that you stack in battle, which also buffs Elation damage. Aha consumes Punchline on their turn to empower the sent out Elation skills, before then giving that consumed number back as a buff called Certified Banger, which acts as a Punchline equivalent for Elation damage dealt outside of Aha's turn, with each Elation unit having a number next to their icon representing the total amount of Certified Banger buffs that they have at any given time, as the buffs are independent and can stack on top of each other. Alright, that's the last time I'm doing that spiel, I promise. Getting into Sparxie's kit, her basic does nothing special, while her skill is the real meat and potatoes of her kit. Using her skill enters her into a live stream, where she can continue to use her skill up to 20 times in order to buff up the enhanced basic attack that then ends the live stream. I want to note early on that all Sparxie's talent does is add Elation damage scaling to the rest of her kit. So for simplicity, I'll just talk about all of these scalings as if they're part of the original ability. The enhanced basic that you're buffing up is a simple blast attack, with regular damage scaling as well as Elation damage scaling. It also, weirdly, still generates a skill point, which is nice, I guess. Every time you use her skill during the live stream, the regular non-Elation damage scaling of the enhanced basic gets increased, while you then also add one random bounce of Elation damage to the attack. So with 20 skills, you can get 20 whole bounces. Skilling also generates Punchline. There's an 80% chance to just generate 1, and a 20% chance to instead generate 2, as well as 2 SP, meaning that if you're lucky, you can gain back skill points while skill spamming, which makes the limit of 20 skills in one turn a bit more realistic to achieve. Using her skill doesn't count as using a skill, which only really matters for the sake of stuff like Sirage's Peerage not working on her, and it doesn't really mess up any synergies that you would otherwise have. It should also be mentioned that during the livestream, other units cannot use their actions, so you can't do the Archer strat of using ally ultimates in between skill uses. This enhanced basic is one of the two main ways that Sparxie does damage, and while spamming her skill to buff it up is important, the other main benefit in spamming is in its great Punchline generation, which then buffs up the other main way that Sparxie does damage, her Elation skill. For that Elation skill that's sent out on Aha's turn, Sparxie sends out an AoE attack of Elation damage, before then sending out 20 bounces of more Elation damage. This Elation skill also generates 2 Thrill, which is a stacking resource in Sparxie's kit that can be used to offset skill point usage, which is yet another way to get more skill usages per turn than you'd initially expect from her SP cap. You do still have the chance of proccing the +2 Punchline +2 SP chance even while at full SP while consuming Thrill, but you obviously just won't get any SP from it. Consuming Thrill is also counted as using a skill point, which is relevant for proccing Sparkle's talent buff and in giving Sparkle 1 energy per skill point consumed. Coming back to what I mentioned during Yao Guang's guide, each Elation unit has a special number assigned to them that determines the order that their Elation skills are being sent out. Right now, all we have is that Yao Guang's number is lower than Sparxie, so Yao Guang applies her AoE debuff before Sparxie's big AoE attack. Sparxie's ultimate, on top of giving a grand 2 Punchline at base, is another AoE attack of Elation damage, with one hit of regular damage scaling that then also scales off of Elation percent, and a second hit of actual Elation damage. The reason the first hit is done that way is because all of Sparxie's Elation damage outside of her Elation skill are supposed to come from the multipliers that are given from her talent, so they had to get around this condition for her ultimate's base hit, which resulted in this weird pseudo-Elation scaling. If you're confused, the reason the Elation damage scaling is centralized within her talent is due to how the Certified Banger buff works, as the multipliers from her talent are all reliant on Sparxie having any Certified Banger in order to activate, with Certified Banger as a mechanic only buffing scalings that rely on Certified Banger. It's way more complicated than it really needs to be, but in practice, it's not something you really need to think about, besides Certified Banger buffs up non-Aha Elation damage. Anyways, the ultimate is a pretty generic hit of damage that won't make up too much of her overall damage. It's important to make use of, but it's not where her kit is centered around. For her minor traces, she gives the full trifecta of crit rate, crit damage, and a very hefty amount of Elation percent. Her first trace is very important, as Sparxie has an attack conversion, giving 5% Elation for every 100 attack over 2000, with a cap of 80% Elation at 3600 attack. A reminder that, at base, Elation damage doesn't scale off of attack. So beyond buffing the surprisingly sizable amount of non-elation damage in her kit, building attack would do nothing for her if not for this trace, where it's now instead incredibly important to max this trace out to its maximum effect. Her second trace is also important, as it adds on buffs to her ultimate depending on how many total elation units are on the team. With just herself, her ultimate generates an extra 2 punchline and 1 thrill. With Yao Guang, the 1 thrill stays, but we get another 2 punchline. And with an eventual third elation teammate, that would give an extra 4 punchline and a gigantic 3 extra thrill, which sounds pretty massive to eventually activate. And her last trace is a crit damage buff to the whole team based on the currently owned punchline, maxing out at an 80% buff. This, alongside her great punchline generation and other team-wide buffs in her vertical investment, potentially point to her taking on more of a supportive sub-DPS role in the future, which I'll say a bit more about in the team section. Finally, her technique is a simple AoE non-elation attack that generates 2 SP, meaning her and Sparkle together start to team off with 8 skill points if your cap can go that high, which basically depends on if you have her signature. For leveling priority, as always, she is a carry, so please just level everything, as even her basic is important due to her enhanced basic attack. As for how to play Sparxie, in spite of how complicated her kit might seem, things are ultimately rather simple on the surface. First, let's get into what you can expect from her skill spamming. Getting even close to 20 skills in one turn might sound impossible, but if you have her signature, and Yao Guang and Sparkle, then she would have an SP cap of 9. If Aha goes, and then Yao Guang goes again with her ultimate that gives Aha a free turn, and then Sparxie ults, then she'll have 5 thrill. So if Sparxie has full SP on turn start, then that's an effective 14 skills, with 9 of those skills having a chance of getting a net +1 SP instead of -1. However, that's only if you start the turn at max SP. If you don't start the turn at max SP, and you then get the +2 SP +2 punchline proc off of your thrill stacks, then you'll get the full net +2 SP before you even start using your skill points. I wouldn't say it's worth it to intentionally leave room for extra SP in the hope of getting lucky with your thrill, unless if you have a lot of thrill. But then again, in the future, with her second trace maxed out, that kind of scenario might become pretty common. So at the very least, it's just a factor to keep in mind while you're skill spamming. Still, even getting that net +1 SP while spending skill points is more impactful than you might think, as say you're at 5 SP and you get the lucky proc, that means you go from 5 to 6, and then 6 to 5, and then 5 to 4, meaning 1 proc of the lucky chance gets you an entire 3 uses of your skill to just get from 5 to 4. And with all of the skill spamming, one of her best in slot teammates, Sparkle, will have a much easier time getting a pretty consistent 2-turn ultimate, thanks to the energy that she gets from Sparxie using a skill, meaning that you'll usually have a pretty good tempo of working through her overcap SP while Sparkle works towards her next ultimate. Another one of the main important things to keep in mind with Sparxie is knowing her damage ranges. You can spam her skill against an enemy until you can't anymore, but if 5 skills would kill them, then anything beyond that is basically wasted. I say basically as there could be, say, stage buffs that recover SP on wave switch, in which case spamming her skill before the wave switch would still be nice for the extra punchline generation and Sparkle energy. But still, most of the time, you should be wary of overdoing things. The problem with this is the inconsistency with her bounce attacks. With her blast attack enhanced basic, AoE attack elation skill, and AoE attack ultimate, Sparxie prefers a good amount of enemies as to not lose any damage scaling, but the literal dozens of random bounces in her kit makes relying on her damage to kill within specific ranges really difficult. It's hard to confidently say, oh, I know 5 skills are enough to kill here, if there's another alive enemy that you don't care about that could theoretically eat all of your bounces. For pure fiction, this isn't that bad, since you still want to kill every enemy anyways, but it can still be frustrating that you're not able to focus down certain mobs past just targeting her blast attack. Another big thing to play around is her certified banger uptime. With its 2-turn buff duration, you'll eventually be burning through your stash as fast as it runs out, assuming you're skilling a similar amount every turn. But there are ways to get around this. If you can end a wave before her turn comes up, like by using something like her ultimate to finish the wave off, then you can retain her high certified banger count into the next wave. This, of course, comes at the cost of missing out on the turn of punchline and energy generation, as well as any ally turns that might have come after her on the action bar, but on the other hand, you get to save any skill points that you would have had to spend not ulting, on top of the already mentioned certified banger retention. So skipping out on Sparxie's turn can be a fair trade-off, depending on what the situation is with the team's SP, Sparxie's certified banger, and how necessary those wasted ally turns were. As for playing around her elation skill, well, it is sent out automatically on Aha's turn, except through Yao Guang's ultimate, which gives Aha a free extra turn with a fixed 20 punchline to work off of. The general goal is to have Sparxie go ahead of Aha's natural turn, either with an action advance or in just being faster, in order to properly funnel enough punchline for her elation skill. And as Aha's turn is where punchline gets converted into certified banger, it's important to keep in mind its action value when trying to keep track of when and how much certified banger will run out on what turn. This also applies to Aha's free turn from Yaoguang. That free turn is not only a big burst of damage with the free Elation skill, but it's also the only way to get instant certified banger on demand without waiting for Aha to naturally consume punchline. So getting a Yaoguang ult off before a Sparxie turn that's going to have big damage is a good idea. Or on the flip side, saving a Yaoguang ult until after Sparxie's turn if Sparxie isn't doing anything on that turn can also be good, since then the free 20 certified banger will not have half of its duration wasted. A lot of the more finicky stuff with Elation skills were also already gone over on Yaoguang's guide, but the basics of make sure to have buffs up on Sparxie before Aha's turn starts, or keep in mind that Aha's action value doesn't reset upon clearing a wave, so clearing a wave right before it acts can cause it to act immediately on the start of the next wave, are still good basic rules to keep in mind. I'll also real quick throw in some bonus advice for the buffed Sparkle, in where you could wait to ult until everyone who could generate SP before Sparkle's turn already has. If you Sparkle ult, get to full SP, and then someone like Dipped or Yaoguang basic, those basics won't generate any SP, but if they basic and then you Sparkle ult, then you are left with her overflow SP instead. This has to be weighed against if she can get hit during that time for energy, or if it'll mess up any timing with Eagle or DDD, but once again, it is important to keep in mind if you can play around it. For Sparxie, though, most of the time, you're just going to be mindlessly skill spamming every turn. It's kind of like how Dot works, where there is a lot going on, but actually playing it at a workable level is not really that difficult. Most of her kit should function fine on its own, honestly, but hopefully I've given you enough things to factor in if you do want to try and be more optimal with her. A plug here to subscribe. If you want this type of coverage for future units, with the next one up being Ashvale, then stick around. And if you are a repeat viewer of this channel and you like my content, then I would really appreciate you checking to see if you're actually subbed. Alright, you checked? Okay, back to the vid. For gearing Sparxie, things start out extremely simple. The new DPS set in 4.0 is made for her. It is her best choice and there's not really any other competition. For planers, there is a new set coming in 4.1, but it is basically identical performance-wise to the 3.8 Tengoku livestream set, so farm whichever one will be better for your account to farm. The other set in 4.1 is a follow-up sub-DPS set meant for Ashvale, while the planer paired with Tengoku livestream is the Amphoria set, which is great for RMC or Cyrene. Banana Amusement is also an equal option if you are using her with Dipped, and Izumo is a slightly behind 4th option if you have it lying around for her to use. The more relevant discussion is in the main stats of her relics. Here's the gist of things. You want to get as many attack main stats as you need to get to 3600 attack, and how many you will need heavily depends on what team you play her in. Sparkle gives 45% attack, her E1 gives another 40, Woho gives 40, the amount of Lushakas can give anywhere from 0 to 36%, and then beyond teams there's things like the base attack of her light cone, her actual attack percent substats, and so on and so forth. When calcing out Sparxie's attack, keep in mind two things. One, obviously teammates' buffs won't show up on the stats page, so you'll have to go in combat to see her actual attack stat. And two, stack conversions can't affect other stack conversions, so stuff like Dip's Bonmei or Robin's ultimate won't contribute to giving her Elation despite giving her attack. So if you're trying to gauge her attack in combat, try not to use these units on your testing team. So beyond a crit body, if you need triple attack main stats to get to 3600 attack, then go for that. Otherwise, you have three alternative options. Option A is to go ER Rope. More ultimates means slightly more damage and more thrill for more skilling. This will be a much better option when her second trace is fully activated, but even right now, I'd say it's basically what I recommend first. Option B is to go Speed Boots, which can help speed tune Aha to 133.4 speed if your Yaoguang is also insanely fast. Doing this isn't needed, and giving Sparxie speed for this anyways will be redundant once we get another Elation unit that can contribute to Aha's speed, but at the very least, if you are not running Sparkle, then getting her to 133.4 speed should be a goal anyways. And technically the third option is to go Fire Damage Orb, but I normally wouldn't really recommend this, unless if the other two options are literally doing nothing for you. It will improve her non-Elation damage, which does matter, but that usually won't be worth it over more ults or an extra Aha turn, assuming using the other options actually makes those things happen. So to summarize stats, again, speed is either left alone at base, or is at 134, depending on if you have Sparkle or if you care about specific Aha speed tuning. Attack is around 3600 with in-combat buffs, and after that, just go full into crit as usual. For light cones, there are three main options: the free-to-play option, the Battle Pass option, and the signature option. The free-to-play choice is not as bad as you would think, and its debuff effect can stack if you're also using this light cone on Yaoguang. The Battle Pass option is a very simple stat stick that only becomes noticeably better than the free-to-play option at higher superimpositions. And the signature gives 48 crit damage, 20 Death Shred for only Sparxie's Elation damage, 20 Elation to the whole team, and a variable raise to the SP cap based on the amount of Elation teammates that currently cannot be capped out. Right now, this signature is pretty good, I'd say. It'll give a fine enough damage jump compared to her alternatives, but it's not really above the average that you would expect from a carry signature, which is to say I don't think it's required for her to perform. The most glaring thing about her signature is how it'll change in the future. The SP cap can be raised one more than it can during 4.0, and when she has future Elation teammates that care a lot about damage, then the team-wide Elation buff will become a lot more impactful. Looking at Yao Guang and Sparxie's E1s and S1s, Sparxie's S1 is the best damage boost while keeping things cheap, Yao Guang's E1 is the best damage boost while being more expensive, Sparxie's E1 is worse in both cost and in raw amp, and Yao Guang's S1 has important utility that is hard to pass up on, while being worse in terms of raw amp. So with that comparison, and with her S1 becoming better later on, Sparxie's signature seems to be a pretty good option, especially if you do want to keep things relatively cheap while investing past just getting her and Yao Guang at E0 S0. Although again, this is not a remembrance situation where you're really incentivized to get a lot of signatures due to a lack of alternatives, as the free-to-play options are solid enough if you do want to stick to them. For teams, wow, did you guys know I already made a teammate tier list covering this topic? You did? Oh, cool. Well, I'll just keep things brief here then. Sparxie's best in slot team is pretty set in stone right now, with Sparkle and Yao Guang both being rather difficult to replace. Sparkle can be replaced by raw ampers, but she herself is great in terms of amp, while also being incredibly important for Sparxie's skill point consumption. Yao Guang, right now, is even harder to replace, as no one is able to supplement her role of giving Aha more turns, both through her ultimate and in giving them free speed by existing. Hopefully if you're building a Sparxie team, you then chose to get Sparkle for free, which makes building this team as pretty cheap all things considered. And even if you do have to bench Yao Guang, Sparxie can still work, especially while we get Elation fights and stage buffs that give Aha free turns anyways, but I would generally say don't expect her to perform at the level they would expect from a brand new carry. For sustains, the main two options are Dipped and Huohuo. Huohuo provides attack and very valuable energy to specifically Yao Guang, while Dipped is much better SP-wise and can more easily sustain through hard-hitting fights. Dipped is easier to use and will be outright better if Huohuo cannot sustain well enough without consuming too much SP, while Huohuo has the better raw utility if the fight lets him make use of it. Every other sustain is as usable as ever, but in the individual aspects of SP positive sustain and raw amp, no one beats these top two unless if they have some vertical investment. I am once again obligated to mention that Sparxie's team will likely change in the near future. 4.2, from what we know so far, is looking to have two separate Elation carries that may or may not want either Sparxie or Yao Guang on their teams. Maybe, and I really want to emphasize maybe, the new Silver Wolf form might want Sparxie on her team, and Evanescea might want Yao Guang. This information is still way too early and flimsy for me to fully get behind and promote in this video, which is to say I do not recommend pulling off of this information alone at all, but the writing is on the wall that Sparxie's core team will be shaken up in some way, somehow, probably in 4.2. So if you are getting Yao Guang specifically because she is a best in slot game-changing support for Sparxie right now, it might be ideal to wait and see how things pan out first. That being said, even if future teams exist with Sparxie and Yao Guang separated, the current 4.0 team with them together is still perfectly usable. In any case, my main advice from my 4.0 full priority video remains. If you want solid info on 4.2 during Sparxie and Yao Guang's banners, try to see if any information pops up during the last few days of 4.0, as things are a bit misaligned right now, and we did get 4.1 info during the last few days of 3.8. Lastly, we have her Eidolons. Her E1 gives 5 punchline after every Aha turn, including from Yao Guang's ultimate, while also giving a team-wide respen buff based on currently owned punchline, with a max of 15% at 15 punchline. As I mentioned before, this Eidolon is worse in terms of raw amp compared to her signature, while also being more expensive. 15 respen is not bad by any means, but it's never really recommendable to go for first when her signature is right there. Her E2 gives Sparxie a free extra turn separate from the action bar after every Aha turn, and yes, this also works with Yao Guang's ult alongside 2 Thrill, as well as giving a 10% crit damage buff per Thrill consumed, maxing out at 40%, which lasts for 2 turns. This Eidolon is pretty good, but it's also a bit odd. Sparxie isn't really a unit that naturally benefits from too many extra turns, as one of her biggest bottlenecks is in raw SP usage, and Sparkle will not be able to keep up with Sparxie's turn count if she's getting 2 to 3 extra turns per cycle. The solution to this is the extra Thrill, giving her a bit to work off of in every extra turn, which can add up a lot if she does get a good amount of lucky procs, but still, it's not as broken as it might sound like. I don't mean to downplay this Eidolon too much, as extra Thrill, extra opportunities for damage, extra energy through more turns, and a pretty good damage buff are all good to have. Just don't see free extra turns and think this is fine on E2 levels are broken or anything like that. It's not an Eidolon I would recommend gunning for, but it's instead what I would just call good. Not bad at all, just good. Her E4 gives more buffs to her ultimate, with an additional +5 punchline and a 36% elation buff, which which lasts for 3 turns. To put it in perspective, Sparxie gives herself around 128% elation naturally, and Eidolons gives around 30-ish% more, so another 36% elation is pretty good. It's at least good for E4 standards, but as with most E4s, it's not optimal to go for this over really any other vertical investment option for your elation teams. And finally, her E6 gives a very original 20% res pen, while also giving an extra bounce onto her elation skill beyond the base 20 bounces for every 1 punchline taken into account on the elation skill. This means Eidolons' ult, with its fixed 20 punchline, adds 20 for a total of 40 bounces, while for natural AHA turns, you can get up to a total of 60 with enough punchline generated. Usually, I'm pretty meh about E6s, but no, this one's pretty dang strong. The majority of her elation skill's damage is in its bounces, so even just adding 20 is already basically doubling its damage, not to mention the res pen, which your whole kit is able to use, or the fact that you can more than just double the amount of bounces. I still don't think it's worth going for, but I do have to give credit that this is an above average E6. And with that, that's everything. Going to the channel member corner, we have Uneku as our next new 6-month member. Thank you as always for your support, and with that, expect to see my Asheville coverage coming up next, which I am really excited about, and until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!